2007. From 2004 to 2016, Dr. Pacht formed and sold 3 PE-funded oil and gas production companies with partners. He is currently the president of Alta Resources. Dr. Pacht has won 5 Best Paper Awards and has published over 80 papers and abstracts. He serves on the Alumni Advisory Board of the School of Earth Sciences at Ohio State, where he received his PhD and gives talks worldwide on energy. And at this time, I'd like to present Dr. Pacht.
Okay, well, let me get the screen going. We're not, for some reason, I'm not seeing what I need to share. Let's see, let's try this again.
If you have PowerPoint filling the screen, you won't be able to see it.
No, when I hit, I understand that.
Okay, good.
Okay, let's see if it comes up this time. Now it's up. Okay, good. Well, I always like to start this talk off with a magic trick. Kind of loosens everybody up. So I want you to watch this light bulb carefully. Off. On. Ta-da! Well, there was actually a time that you believed that was magic. Somewhere between the ages of 2 and 3, you discovered the light switch. And you drove your parents crazy going off, on, off, on, off, on. But then you turned 3. You were older. You were more mature. You were toilet trained. And the light switch lost its magic. You took it for granted, just like we all take the light switch for granted. We all take the plug for granted. But what if you were right way back then? What if the light switch really was magic? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to ask the question, how many watt hours of energy does the average American man, woman, and child use each year? Now, I can't see you all raise your hands. So this, but I'll expect you to be honest. Is it A, 0 to 100,000, B, 100,000 to a million, C, a million to 10 million, D, 10 to 100 million, or E, over 100 million watt hours? To give you an example, this is 7 watt hours. Well, chances are you probably got it wrong. The answer is over 100 million watt hours per year. In fact, every man, woman, and child in the world uses 20 million watt hours per year. That includes a child by Biafra, and that includes Bill Gates. So why is that number so big? Energy isn't everything we do. Food for a family of 4 for a week takes the energy equivalent of 22 gallons of gasoline to grow, transport, and sell. Everybody has a pair of blue jeans. Single pair of blue jeans will consume the energy equivalent of 3 gallons of gasoline to create the raw materials, manufacture, transport, sell, and wash. Everyone takes energy for granted. We get in our cars, we think about the amount of energy we use because we watch that gas pump dial up numbers as we're filling it up. But we don't think about the amount of energy used to build the car or to build and maintain the road. Well, if energy isn't everything we do, then the cost of energy isn't everything we do. And most decisions worldwide on energy are based in cost. Increases in the cost of energy affects every part of the economy. And those increases hit the poor the hardest. Well, the reason you didn't think my test was very impressive is because we live here. And I guess some of y'all live out in here. But what if you lived here? Africa is a continent of 1.2 billion people, and it's dark. What does that mean as far as prosperity? Well, what we see, we can look at the Latin America, we can look at third world countries and look at their poverty levels based on how much energy they have. You can see that Latin America is largely 100% electrified. There's a very small portion of the population in poverty. Now, this is poverty defined by the UN as living on less than $3.10 a day. Asia is a little spread out, and this chart is actually old. China, India would be right up here now. So, but you can see we still have pretty high levels of electrification. Look at sub-Saharan Africa. We have low levels of electrification and high levels of poverty. In fact, we can draw a straight line from poverty to electricity. Now, it's easy to think that this is just a third world problem. None of us live in sub-Saharan Africa after all. But in truth, 1/3 of the population in the United States has been considered energy poor, where they've had a strain to pay their electric bills. And in fact, 20% of the American population has had to choose between energy and food or medicine. So what does reducing energy poverty mean? Well, some things are obvious. Hunger. You can plow a field with a tractor instead of oxen. Clean water. You can drill a well and pump water from the well instead of getting a polluted river. But what do I mean by clean cooking? All of us cook with one of two things: gas or electricity. But what if you don't have gas or electricity? You cook with what's available. Now, for much of the world, what's available is wood and brush. And actually in Africa, there's a lot of childhood respiratory problems. These people are in a hut all day in which cooking smoke is being emitted. What if you don't have wood? There are many areas in Africa that are completely denuded of trees. Again, you use what's available. And what's available is animal and human waste. Now, I'm sure you all had a good dinner, but you might want to consider how good that dinner would be had it been cooked with poop. So what if we could light up Africa? What if you've never seen your friends or your family at night except by firelight and moonlight, and now you do? Wouldn't that be magic? Well, when we talk about energy, we have to talk about Scott Tinker calls the 3 E's: energy, the environment, and the economy. We can't talk about one without the other because they're all closely interrelated. Much of the discussion about the environment is focused on CO2, but there's also other issues like habitat loss and land use. We talk about energy, usually discussions are focused on fossil fuels versus renewables, but nuclear power and other alternative forms have an important role to play. And when we talk about the economy, we need to consider not only ourselves, most of whom are upper middle class or above, and probably many upper middle class or above, but those who are truly poor. And we also have to consider the fact that countries like China and India will act in their own best interest. And it is in their best interest to have cheap energy. So what does the source of energy need to be? Well, it needs to be affordable. Energy that's not affordable is not sustainable. The government subsidies can make energy affordable, but subsidies cannot be sustained forever. It has to be available. Fossil fuel sources of energy are easily transportable, but other sources have greater challenges. It has to be reliable. Solar and wind are intermittent sources. Solar only works when the sun shines, and wind only works when the wind blows. You've heard a lot of talk about batteries, but an average grid storage battery depletes in 4 hours. They're great for addressing short-term fluctuations in wind, but they don't work very well when the wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining. And then there's pollution. Different sources of energy create different levels and different types of pollution, because this includes, but it's not limited to, CO2 and methane. There is no perfect energy source. And today, most of the world's energy comes from fossil fuels. You can see here that only about 4.5% of the world's energy comes from renewables, wind and solar. Oil is up here the highest, followed by coal and natural gas. So in order to look at the different energy sources, we need to look at how they're being used. And when we talk about oil, we're really talking about transportation. Why do we use oil for transportation? Because it works. You can see when we look at batteries, they're very heavy relative to the amount of energy they produce. Gases are both light and don't produce a lot of energy per unit volume. But gasoline and diesel are right here in the sweet spots. Think about it. You can fill up a Honda Prius and you can take 4 people 55 miles at 60 miles an hour in comfort on 1 gallon of gas. That's really quite something. Now, you've heard a lot of talk about electric cars, but we need to understand what that actually means. The batteries that power electric cars do not arrive from an alternative universe. They take a lot of metals and materials. And in fact, a guy named Harrington did a study, and he said to convert all the cars in the United Kingdom to electricity by 2050 would require the world's entire production of neodymium, 3/4 of the world's production of lithium, and at least half the world's cobalt production. Now, I took his numbers and I said, okay, well, there's a lot more cars here in the United States. So what would it be to turn all of our cars electricity? Well, it'd be 1.7 times world cobalt production, 3 times world neodymium production, and 2.6 times the global lithium production. One battery requires us to mine and process 250 tons of material. But let's say we could snap our fingers and convert all the cars magically to electricity. Would we reduce carbon? The answer is no. Jürgen in 2021 said we'd only reduce CO2 emissions by 5% because we're using today's energy mix. Gillingham, in a more recent paper, said the conversion to electric cars would actually increase. And that's due to a couple of things. One is obviously we still use fossil fuels to build all the materials that go into those cars. Other thing that's important to note is that when you build a car, you build a car. When you build a car, electric car, you build a car and you build a battery. And all the mining, processing, refining, and manufacturing that goes into building that battery adds to the carbon budget or the per car amount of carbon that is created by the manufacturing process. But the big thing we got to ask is where are all these elements going to come from? The IEA, International Energy Association, said that in order to meet climate goals by 2040, we'd have to increase lithium use by 40 times and graphite, copper, and nickel by 20 to 25 times. Do we have that enough minerals? I don't know. Nobody does. But we do know who controls the market. You can look, if we look at fossil fuels, you can see the US is actually the largest producer of fossil fuels. And we have a natural gas supply sufficient to last us a couple of years. But look at the minerals that go into renewables. Okay, you can, and particularly look here, all processed in China. Now, we're seeing right now the results of Western Europe being dependent on Russia for their energy. Do we want to be dependent on China for our energy? And the other question is are renewables better for the environment? This is a picture of a lithium mine in Western Australia. This is a picture of a pump jack. Here they are to scale. Which one of these creates more environmental damage? There's also another side that people don't want to talk about, and that's the dirty side of clean energy. 50% of the cobalt in the world comes from one province in one country, the Congo. And it's not mined according to modern OSHA standards. There are large mechanized mines run by the Chinese, but there's also over 15,000 artisanal mines where a bunch of Congolese actually get together and start mining. And they use kids for obviously reasons. Everybody has to work and kids are small, they can get in tight crevices. Now there's a lot of NGOs in the Congo, and you'd think they'd be against this, and you'd be wrong. The Congo is so poor that these mines provide an important source of income for the Congolese. If you want to know what energy poverty looks like, take a good look. Now we can switch to electricity, and electricity is unique and it is the only commodity that's consumed the moment it is created. Again, we can go back to batteries. In order to store all of the electricity the US uses in one day would take the entire output of the Tesla Gigafactory for 500 years. And storing energy is not cheap. According to JP Morgan, it costs about $18 a barrel to purchase an oil storage tank. But to store the amount of energy equal to the energy in 1 barrel of oil would cost $510,000 based on a $300 per kilowatt cost of a Tesla mega pack. So again, when we look at electricity worldwide, we're looking at a fossil fuel world. See, hydro is about 15.8%, nuclear is 10.3%, renewables for electricity alone are only about 8.4%. So let's look at each one of these materials used in generating energy, or these types of energy, talk about their pros, and talk about their cons. Coal is available, abundant, affordable, and reliable. It is the most abundant and cheapest energy source in the world, and it's the easiest to mine and process. That's why it has been the dominant energy choice of developing countries in Asia. In fact, coal usage has increased over 5 times in Asia during the past 30 years. India accomplished an economic miracle. In the year 2000, 2/3 of Indian homes were without electricity. 20 years later, there's only 31 million homes without electricity in a country that has 1.2 billion people. Their per capita GDP tripled as a result of electrification. But they did it using coal. 75% of their electricity comes from coal. China is the biggest user of coal in the world. They currently have 9.93 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity, and they're adding another 259 gigawatts. In fact, they just announced plans to expand domestic coal mining by 300 million tons a year and to build up a 600 million ton coal reserve. China sees coal as a strategic material. The US, you can see we're declining our coal-fired capacity. It's down from 317 gigawatts to about 244 gigawatts. And of course, coal produces over 2 pounds of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Natural gas is abundant, affordable, and reliable. It's got an efficient transportation infrastructure. There's lots of pipelines. And it's relatively clean. It produces about half of the CO2 per kilowatt hour that coal does. We've heard a lot of talk about methane emissions, but they've decreased by 24% as gas production has increased by 19% and oil by 65% from 2011 to 2017. And in fact, we've seen a 14% reduction in our CO2 emissions since 2005 as a result of switching from coal to natural gas. The other thing that's happening is we're looking very closely at carbon capture, and there's been some significant advances in this field. The biggest one is alum cycle. Traditional power plants all use fossil fuel to heat water, create high pressure steam, and combined cycle plants also use gas to turn a turbine. Now, the problem is they're inefficient. Normal steam power plants, coal and natural gas, are 42 to 47% efficient. Combined cycle plants get up to 55% efficiency, but most of the heat is lost up the smoke. Most energy is lost as heat up through the smokestack. Alum cycle plant uses oxygen to heat CO2 to a point which becomes a supercritical fluid. They use that supercritical fluid to drive the turbines. Well, as it turns out, supercritical CO2 is much better at driving turbines than steam. And so the plants are 62% efficient, and they postulate they can get that up to 73% efficiency. There's already a 50 megawatt facility online in La Porte, and a 300 megawatt facility will come online late this year near San Antonio. The technology is cost competitive with wind and solar. Dan Crenshaw once said, if you're not serious about nuclear, you're not serious about global warming. Nuclear has it all. It's affordable, reliable, and clean. Zero pollution of any sort. Our long-term issues with storage of nuclear waste, and certainly there are countries we don't want to have nuclear reactors. But France gets 75% of their electricity from nuclear power, and they're the largest electricity exporter in the world. They solved their storage problem. Right now, they store it in an above-ground facility, but by 2030, they'll have an underground facility that will safely store radioactive material for 100,000 years. And they recycle 96% of the fissionable material. Sadly, it's not been politically possible to build new nuclear plants in the United States. And in fact, most are reaching the end of their service life. The average age of a nuclear plant in the US is over 40 years. Ones in France are newer, safer, and better. And there's some major new innovations coming in nuclear, most notably small modular reactors, which run on passive cooling. Biomass is the biggest scam going. It's affordable and reliable, but there's only so many trees, and it puts 9% more CO2 in the atmosphere than coal, in addition to a whole host of other pollutants. What the sales pitch is for biomass is, well, you grow this tree and it produces all this oxygen, so when you burn it, it's a zero-sum game. But nobody asks the question, what if you don't burn it? If you don't burn that tree and allow it to naturally decay, much of the carbon is recycled by microbes, fungus, insects, moss, etc. And that is not recyclable by plants and animal is stored in soil as humus. That's your future coal. Hydro is great where you have it. State of Washington gets 68% of the power from hydro plants, and they export a lot of power to California. But where I live, it's a bit flat. You need, for a good hydro, you need steep mountains and lots of rain. And that works great along the west coast of Oregon and Washington, not so good here down in Texas or in Kansas or in many other areas. I'm going to talk about wind and solar with the same slides because they both have the same advantages and the same disadvantages. They're clean, but they're more expensive than other energy sources, even with government subsidies. And they're both intermittent sources. Wind only works when the wind blows, solar only works when the sun shines. The other thing is that centralized solar plants and wind farms require a large footprint. They require low value real estate. And it's necessary to develop a lot of infrastructure, i.e. high tension power lines, to get that power from these areas of low value real estate to large city centers. So I asked myself the question, how big does a solar plant need to be to power Greater Houston? Well, the Ivanhoe power plant, which I use as an example, is in the Mojave Desert, and it supplies electricity to 140,000 households. Greater Houston has 2.3 million households, and the solar radiation is less. I also had to account for the fact that residential use is only 38% of total electricity use. So the size of that plant is 403 square miles, or pretty much the size of Houston. I live here, I'm okay. All these people here, they're gonna have to move. So where are we gonna put the darn thing? Now, what about wind? I don't have to go to California and talk about wind. Texas has more wind energy than any other state. And the reason is large portions of Texas are flat, windy, and empty. So I looked at the Buffalo Gap Wind Farm. It has a nameplate capacity of 523 megawatts. What do I mean by nameplate capacity? That means when all the turbines are running full blast, that's how much power it'll produce. But the turbines don't run full blast all the time. And so the average capacity is about a third of that, or 174 megawatts. So at average capacity, it's only providing electricity for 58,000 households. And one of the things that happens in Texas, for those of you who don't live here, is one, actually there's two things that happen. In summer, it gets really, really, really hot. And two, there's a high pressure system that sits over Texas and the wind stops blowing. The result is not only in 2019, but also for a very short time in 2021, we had summer electricity shortages, and the price of electricity briefly zoomed up to over $9,000 a megawatt. The same thing happened, of course, during the Texas freeze, but in that case, we also lost our gas plants as well as our wind. And so the gas plants could not keep up. The other thing that's interesting is a lot of people are for wind energy as long as it's not next door. California has stopped permitting wind farms because of all the legal issues. And New York had to pass a law to require wind farms to be permitted, regardless of whether the residents wanted them or not. But the biggest issue is a wind farm takes even more acreage. This is the Buffalo Gap Wind Farm. It's 108 square miles. Basically, you're using about an acre and a half per household. Now, what about rooftop solar? I looked at what my bill would cost to get 55% of my electricity from rooftop solar. Right now, I pay an average bill of about $325 a month. Well, the cost for installation of solar panels for half of that is $45,500. The government, in its infinite wisdom, will write me a check for $10,500. So my cost is only $35,000. Well, I figured, okay, what's the monthly payment on a $35,000 note for 20 years? 5% interest. And that was $230.98. So I can either pay my $325 a month or half my electricity bill plus that $231 note, or about $75 more per month. Now, I'm 70 years old. I'm not getting on top of my 2-story house to wash those solar panels off. So there's also the yearly maintenance, which is about $600,000 a year, which I did not include. And of course, not everyone lives in a single family household. My kids live in apartments. They can't choose solar energy. But what if I live in another state? What if I lived in Connecticut? I pay 9.7 cents a kilowatt hour. In Connecticut, I would be paying 21.3 cents a kilowatt hour. So there, my energy bill would be far higher, $612, and I'd save about $80 a month by going to solar. So why are Connecticut's costs so high? Biggest issue is building natural gas pipelines. The biggest natural gas field in the United States is the Marcellus in northeastern Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is 69 miles as a crow flies from Connecticut. And this manifests, but there are no pipelines. This manifests itself in 2 ways. To heat a home with natural gas costs $11 per million BTU. Now, when I was a kid, probably before I turned 10, my parents replaced our oil burning furnace with a gas furnace. And until recently, I didn't think anybody actually had oil burning furnaces. But Connecticut, 44% of those use heating oil for natural gas, which costs twice as much and produces about 1/3 more CO2. Electricity costs 4 times as much. Now, again, why is that? Well, here's a map of natural gas pipelines in the United States. You can see we got a lot here. We also got a lot in the Midwest. You can see, look at Ohio and Pennsylvania. But here's a close-up of Connecticut. We have 1 pipeline. They simply don't have enough gas to be able to provide Connecticut and state and adjoining Massachusetts with the gas to create enough electricity. The result is they actually are importing LNG from Yemen, and until quite recently, they were importing it from Russia. Now, did anybody ask the people how they felt about paying more money for clean energy? Actually, someone did, and that was Yale University. There are all kinds of polls that say everybody loves green energy, but Yale asked the question, what would you pay for it? What they found out, you can see they interviewed more Democrats than Republicans, and obviously Democrats were more supportive of paying more for clean energy than Republicans. But you can see the overall total, only 14% would pay over $30 a month. And remember, my bill is about $75 extra a month. And even when you go to people who call themselves liberals, that 14% stays the same. Well, can we scale wind and solar? Today, wind and solar don't make up for the global growth in energy consumption. There's what we call in the oil business, the creaming curve. We drill prospects in the best areas first. And we've done the same thing with renewables. We built solar plants in the Mojave Desert, and we built wind farms in the middle of nowhere, Texas. But additional locations will be more expensive, it's going to be more litigation, and it'll be suboptimal. Other thing is we keep coming back to this tricky issue of metals. All the voltaic systems currently on the market are relying on one or more raw materials characterized by critical or near critical by the EU or the US Department of Energy. That includes polysilicon, indium, beryllium, gallium. They're naturally scarce. And in fact, we keep hearing about the cost of solar panels going down. Well, that was actually true because China was cornering the market. China now has 80% of the PV market. They've done that, and now prices are going up. The cost of solar panels is up 18% in 2021 due to a 300% increase in the cost of polysilicon. Now, this is something I've just started looking at and I'm really fascinated by. In 2013, a group of authors in Germany looked at energy return versus energy invested. So in other words, if you build a nuclear power plant and you include the cost of mining uranium, the cost of refining the uranium, the cost of transporting the uranium, the cost of building the plant, et cetera, you still get 75 times more energy than you put into it. Combined cycle gas plant, it's the same thing. It's 28 times more. And that includes the cost of drilling the wells, the cost of producing the gas, transporting the gas, as well as the cost of building and maintaining the plant. But look what happens when you come down to PV solar. Now, when I say buffered, what does buffered mean? Buffered means the cost of battery backup. So if you have solar panels with battery backup, you're only getting 1.6 times the energy that it costs to mine and refine the materials, manufacture the solar panels, transport them, and install them. Now, we saw in an earlier slide that much of that manufacturing is done in China, and much of it is done using coal. If we compare that to a gas plant, gas drilling rigs use natural gas. The gas is transported by natural gas. And obviously, a gas plant uses natural gas. Natural gas produces about half the CO2 as coal does. So I've not done the research to determine what the carbon budget is of a buffered solar plant. But my guess is pretty much 1 for 1. You're not saving, you're putting so much energy into manufacturing, and so much of that manufacturing is based on coal that you're really not putting any less carbon in the air. So we're back to this slide. If energy isn't everything we do, the cost of energy isn't everything we do. And so we should ask the question, should we subsidize China? You can see over 1980, you can see the United States energy use has been flat, and it's actually declined since 2005. Europe's been flat as, our coal CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions also decline in Europe. But look at China. China's overall world emissions have increased by 23% since 2005, and nearly all that increase is from China. And watch out for India. Remember, I just said India now is fully electrified. And guess what? When people have electricity, they want more of it. When they have Indians are now getting well enough that they're going to want cars. So you're going to see a large growth in carbon emissions from India. So let's look at where we're at today. Global energy demand is growing. And again, as I said in earlier slides, current 89% fossil fuels. Can't even see solar on this graph. And the EIA is predicting a 50% increase in the use of energy, almost all in Asia. Population is increasing too. And you can look at Africa. We expect Africa's population to double by 2100. So let's take that graph I showed you earlier. That's where we're at now. Okay. Now we keep hearing we want to be carbon free by 2035, 2040, 2050. The number keeps changing, but the message is still the same. What does that look like? That looks like that. Does anybody think that's realistic? Anyone? This whole thing started with an inconvenient truth. So I want to put out a few more. It's not technically possible to move to 100% carbon-free energy in the near future. It's not politically possible, and it's not economically possible. In my own opinion, it is inhumane to deny developing and undeveloped countries the benefits of clean energy, cheap energy that we have enjoyed all our lives. But it doesn't matter what I think. We're not going to go to war with China or India over the amount of coal they use. And they're going to continue to use coal as long as they see a competitive advantage in doing so. So what is realistic? Well, Scott Tinker basically said that we can reach crossover, that is between foundational fuels of coal and oil in the next 50 years if we increase nuclear energy by 3 times, double natural gas production, and increase renewables by 5 times. Now, I said these things in 2012, and with the exception of nuclear, we've actually done that. Sadly, we're going the opposite way with nuclear. We're decommissioning our power plants. They decommissioned the Indian Point plant in New York, which produced 15% of New York's power in 2021. Where's that energy going to come from? It's being imported from places that largely burn coal. And in fact, even the National Renewable Energy Laboratory agreed that more gas generation is necessary and more natural gas use is necessary. And there's, of course, some exciting things on the future. We looked at the Allen Center technology. We're also looking at methods to actually scrub CO2 from the air. In fact, they're being employed in the Permian Basin by Oxy right now. Here's what we shouldn't do. New York refused to permit new pipelines. And so the utilities said, well, we can't install new hookups for customers because we can't guarantee supply. And the former governor, Cuomo, basically said, no, you have to allow people to hook up anyway. So the plan is to transport natural gas by truck. Well, first off, that's going to increase CO2 because of the emission by the trucks. But the other thing is, does it ever snow in New York? Well, New York's famous for its blizzards. And if the New York Thruway shuts down, people are going to freeze. There's an assumption among many that if you shut down pipelines, people will just walk away from multi-billion-dollar investments. And that's not true. The Keystone Pipeline was shut down with the assumption was that, well, they wouldn't mine for any oil out in the tar sands in Alberta. Well, what's happening instead is the government of Canada is building an extension to the Trans Mountain Pipeline. They'll ship that oil to Vancouver, and then they'll ship by tankers to ports along the West Coast in Asia. And of course, not only does that increase CO2 by tanker shipment, but that greatly increases the chance of an oil spill. Well, we stopped oil and gas leasing on federal lands, and I said that will lead to more oil imports. Turns out there's not a lot of oil to import these days. And so what it's leading to is basically higher prices. Banning hydraulic fracturing would be an absolute disaster. everybody's still going to want power. They're still going to want, all the people that are against hydraulic fracturing are still going to want to play on one of these. And they're still going to want to do their homework or whatever on one of these. And that power is going to be supplied by coal. So we'll see more CO2. There's another thing in the news these days. Maybe you've seen the movie, directed by Vladimir Putin, but it's produced by Western energy policy, or Western European energy policy. In year 2021, Europe paid Russia $108 billion for energy. Basically, Germany, more than any other country, is funding the war against the Ukrainians. In the early 2000s, Germany decided they were going to go green. So they started decommissioning. At that time, they had getting 25% of their power from nuclear. They decided to decommission their nuclear plants, and they outlawed hydraulic fracturing. The result is today, Germany is the world's largest importer of natural gas. And you can see what happened. You can see that right around 2013, as they began to decommission their plants, began to run out of natural gas, their imports skyrocketed. They're the sixth largest importer of oil in the world. 34% of their oil comes from Russia. 55% of their natural gas comes from Russia, and 52% of their coal. In what may or may not be seen as a conflict of interest, the chancellor and engineer in all these things is now on the board of Gazprom, the board of Rosneft, and he's president of the board of directors of Nord Stream. Now, how did their investment in wind work out? Well, their CO2 emissions from power generation rose by 13% in 2021. Now, you could argue that's because COVID came to an end, but their electricity use only rose by 2.9%. So the result is they've been forced to use more fossil fuels, and in particular, more coal. And according to the National Review, Russia will make more money from energy in 2022 than they did in 2021. And you probably just saw the headline, Germany is refusing to supply any more weapons to Ukraine. And you can see their point. If Russia cuts off natural gas to Germany, their factories shut down, their people freeze. Germany is totally dependent on Russia for their entire industrial base. And that's not a good thing. And we should think about that when we talk about moving to renewables and becoming dependent on China. So we're back to the 3 E's. Now, I'm kind of right down here at the energy economy side of the scale. When I give this talk to universities, they're all up here at the environmental part of the scale. And everybody's yelling and screaming at each other. Yelling and screaming is kind of fun sometimes, but it doesn't solve problems. We need to be in what Scott Tinker calls a radical middle, what I call the rational middle. And part of the problem there is there are no simple answers. Oh, there's lots, make no mistake, there's lots of simple answers. Sun good, oil bad. That's a simple answer. Global warming is a hoax. That's a simple answer. The problem is both those simple answers are wrong. And of course, H.L. Mencken said it best. For every complex problem, there's a simple answer. There's an answer that's clear, simple, and wrong. It's going to take a lot of thought and a lot of multivariate solutions to balance our energy use and our CO2 emissions. The bottom line is the Earth will get hotter and we will adapt. And with that, I will take questions.
My question would be how soon are we going to be able to have some of these newer nuclear options available to us?
That's an interesting question. The only country that has SMRs, small modular reactors, currently in operation is Russia. Turns out Russia likes to export their oil instead of using it to generate electricity. They've cited some of them. They've been citing some. In fact, there's a couple that are cited in Washington, and they're working their way through the permitting process. I don't know how far along they are in the permitting process. It's obviously dependent on who occupies the White House in the next 2 years. But I would guess that we're probably 5 to 10 years away from seeing those plants up and running.
Because what's always worried me about the generation of power plants that we largely have is that this intractable problem of getting rid of the waste, which I think Finland has solved part of that, and France has solved part of it. But it seems to me that we have to move to a different type of nuclear power station to get away from this.
Well, the answer, I mean, we actually had the answer, if anybody remembers, was it the nuclear storage facility in Nevada that Harry Reid said, not in my backyard. The bottom line is that France has a centralized storage facilities. And we now know the technology because they're developing it to store nuclear waste underground, which is where but the other thing that people aren't aware of is France recycles, like I say, 96% of their waste.
Yeah.
So the result is, quite frankly, they don't have a lot of waste. And that technology has been just quite recently developed. You couldn't do that 10 or 15 years ago. And so as we develop and site more nuclear reactors, we'll integrate that recycling technology into the process. You'll see an overall reduction of nuclear waste. There will have to be multiple storage sites, though, set up and maintained exactly like France does.
Right. Has anybody else got any questions? Do I see any hands raised? No. So of course.
I got a question from Tom C.
Good.
Well, I mean, I don't, people sometimes disagree with me. His question is, how do you respond to somebody who's pro-alternative energy when their only answer is describing the devastating impacts of global warming? And the answer is that I try to say, okay, there's pros and cons of different sorts of energy, but you have to understand that wind and solar do not arrive, and batteries don't arrive from an alternative universe. To build, transport, maintain them takes a lot of energy. To dispose of them takes a lot of energy. NPR, which is hardly pro-oil business, suggests that we had to dispose of 720,000 tons of wind turbine blades. What are they made of? They're made of fiberglass. They're made of petroleum products. And fiberglass doesn't decay. So you've got to balance the cost of those against lowering carbon. You also have, I also talk about the fact that not everybody's well off. And, if we look at right now, okay, oil, you see the increased cost of gasoline. Who's that hurting? It's hurting the poor. Okay. Somebody else asked, what's the role of geothermal? I've gotten that question a couple of times. I need to add a slide. There's an active power plant called the Geysers Power Plant in California that's producing clean energy through steam. As far as I know, it's the only active power plant. But California is going to be, let me back up. Eastern California and much of Nevada is the Great Basin, and you have a very thin continental crust, and the mantle is upwelled. So you get very high heat flow throughout that area. And so I think that there's a lot of future potential in Nevada for development of future geothermal power. If you go to Iceland, nearly all of Iceland's power comes from geothermal. Somebody else asked, what are the pods that humans will still be on this planet 1,000 years from now? Well, here's the deal. About 21,000 years ago, Chicago was under a mile of ice. That was our continental elevation. We're currently in an interglacial stage. So all you have to do is wait around another 8 to 10,000 years, and Chicago will be under a mile ice again, and the global warming problems will be solved. The bottom line is, you're talking. I think I misunderstood your question. I think you're talking about the storage facilities. And as far as if nuclear waste storage is still a problem 100,000 years from now, they'll deal with it then. The landfill gases, there have been a lot of people have actually tried to commercialize that. And there are small amounts of gas produced by landfill, but it's really been negligible. It's been very difficult to scale, and it's been very difficult to make money at. It's like almost a little bit of a mom and pop business. And most of those really have gone bankrupt. Part of the problem is that landfills don't seal very well. And so most of the gas that's generated leaks out through the landfill.
A lot of your talk hinged on the energy cost and in fact the land destruction involved in mining the things that are needed for renewable power. And the BEG is actually starting up a project to look at the life cycle costs of various materials and technologies. And there's also a program at Pforzheim University in Germany that looks at life cycle costs.
That's where the German article came from. But send me the information. I'm sorry to interrupt because I got excited. Send me the information if you would on the BEG program. I'd really be interested in that.
I will try and do that for you. Yeah, I gave a series of talks to the Pforzheim people about the energy cost of exploring and drilling for copper several years ago, because that's one of the materials, one of their main materials, because it's so basic to the electrical industry. So,
well, send me that too, because I'd be very interested in that as well. So, I mean, this talk, the talk you see today wasn't the talk I gave a month ago. I keep updating my talk as I get more material, and I try to keep doing more and more research. So, the fact that you're an expert in this stuff,
I don't think we can really make logical conditions until we develop these kind of numbers, this kind of knowledge, because we're sort of guessing at the end results of some pretty massive shifts in our consumptions of materials.
Well, I think in large part, to be quite blunt, it's not going to happen. Okay, you can see what's happened. You can see what happened when, energy prices have risen. People don't like paying $4 a gallon at the pump. And people don't like when their heating bills zoom up. Okay, I see a long question. So I think people are going to start rebelling, and they're not going to like these increases. Okay, right. I see two questions. One is I've got to read from David Williamson. In fact, rather than me reading it, David, could you just get live and ask your question? I think it'd be more efficient for everybody to hear it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yep. Thanks. Sorry it's so long-winded, I was just typing away. Great presentation, and I agree with that. I've spent 21 years in oil and gas and 5 in mining, by the way, so I'm a big advocate for what we do as an industry and energy independence and all that. But I was just kind of curious, because a lot of times when people are comparing and contrasting renewables against fossil fuels, they're kind of doing it based on the technologies today. And that kind of reminds me a lot of like back in the day when whale oil, for instance, was so much more efficient than other types of energy, like burning, wood or whatever. But obviously that's come and go. And same thing with like the coal industry is largely dead now because, thankfully, to my industry, natural gas. But do you see a time down the road when certain renewables, not all of them, but the technologies will actually make them more competitive, where they can actually maybe at least have a blended energy economy where we can maybe, because I'm in this industry. I also do believe in, man's impact on the climate. So I'd like to find balance. I
think that, well, first off, the old joke is when I was a freshman in college, we were 10 years away from nuclear fusion. And, 50 years later, we're 10 years away from nuclear fusion. So, that if we solve that problem, we're in good shape. But the problem there are some basic physics issues with renewables that are very difficult to defeat. I mean, the maximum efficiency you can get out of a solar panel is about 30%. I think we're about 20-something% right now. I'm not really clear how wind can get more efficient. You know, I don't know enough about the physics of building better wind turbines, but we're still dependent on wind, you know, the wind turbines to, you know, the wind to blow. The problem that we basically face is these are low density energy sources. You know, nuclear, I mean, you know, a chunk of uranium the size of my phone will power a city, okay? But you need a lot of wind turbines to power that same city. So I think you're going to have some real limitations on scaling. Now, right now, there's a lot of, you know, we're kind of gotten as good as we can get with lithium ion batteries. All kinds of different batteries technologies being developed right now. There are people trying to use iron, which is obviously a very common mineral in their batteries. You know, there's sulfur dioxide batteries. And it's possible that the technological changes will come with new battery technology. But if we really want to balance carbon and energy, the answer is nuclear. It's really the only, I mean, and that's an answer we can do today. And we've seen it in France. France gets exactly 6% of their electricity from fossil fuels. And that's legacy plants. And I mean, they could easily get that down to zero, and they'd still be the largest energy exporter in the world. In fact, most of their electricity, most of the electricity goes to Germany. So really, I think there's an answer here, but it's not wind and solar. I think the answer is nuclear.
I actually wholeheartedly agree with you, by the way. I think the France example is a great one. I just wish we change our, you know, our thinking in this country and try and just do something about that, honestly. But thanks a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that for people not reading the chat, this is being recorded and it'll be available on the AIPG National YouTube channel. So you can watch me again and again.
What, can you say anything more? Was it the alum cycle or the Hallam cycle that you described?
ALLAM.
Yeah.
And I'll be glad to send you a raft of papers on that in return for your BEG stuff and your lecture.
Okay.
In fact, I'll send them to you anyway. But
okay, well, it's getting close to time. Wendy, would you like to say anything additional about how people can access the talk in future?
Sure. So we will be working on getting it ready, and it'll take a little bit. We have the first presentation that of the Texas webinar series, and then we will continue to upload the second, the third, and keep going. It's just taking us a little time to get through the process of getting it available. So we will have it available on the website with the link. We have a list of all the YouTube videos available on our channel. You can sign up and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll know as soon as it's uploaded, and we'll send out an email as well. So we appreciate everybody attending, and Jory, we appreciate you presenting. It was very interesting and I really enjoyed it.
well, thank you very much. I enjoy doing these. I'll make a pitch. If there's other groups that you know of, this is kind of my give back retirement job, researching energy. So if there's other groups that any of you know of that would like to hear this talk, please recommend them. I work cheap, as in free.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
And I would like to thank Jory too, and I'd like to thank Matt Cowan, who stepped in for me because I'm a bit under the weather tonight. And also I'd like to thank Steve Narek, who I see is still with us. Steve was prepared to stand in if Matt couldn't. So I thank you, both of you, and especially our speaker. It was an excellent presentation, and thank you all for
Thank you very
attending.
much.